Welcome to Speaking of Business, conversations with Canadian innovators, entrepreneurs, and business leaders. I'm Goldie Hyder, President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Today I'm speaking with Stephan Crétier, founder, chairman, and CEO of GardaWorld, the world's largest privately owned security company. Stephan knows all about risk and reward. In 1995, he sold his car and took out a second mortgage to start the company. Since then, he's faced bankruptcy 4 times, nearly losing his home in the process. But thanks to Stephan's incredible tenacity and entrepreneurial spirit, the company today is worth more than $10 billion. In this episode, we'll talk about Stephan's early years as a baseball umpire, his illicit high school business, how's that for a teaser, and the number of fugitives on the island of Montreal. This is a great one, so sit back and enjoy. Stephan, thanks so much for doing this.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're delighted to have you here now. Before I start talking about you, we have to talk about your business because you made a major transaction back in July.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I privatized the company, in 2012, really trying to conquer the world at that time. And we've gone through 2 private equity. They always say they're there for 5-7 years. But when you bring them returns of 35% every year, they have a tendency of going out. So we privatized at $1.1 billion, and we just did the largest buyout in Canadian history this summer at $5.3 billion, where I took 50% of the business with a new private equity. So very exciting.
We'll come back to that, I'm sure. But now that we've gotten the headline out of the way in terms of the big news at Garda this year, let's go to the beginning. I want to start talking about your upbringing here. Your father was a maitre d' and a union leader. Your mother was an esthetician.
Yep.
How did you wind up in business with that?
I've got no idea. Maybe it's a question of survival or something. There's this question in growing up and being independent. My parents immigrated late 50s to try to get a better life here. And yes, they did get a better life.
He came from Italy and she came from Switzerland.
They met in Geneva. One of my sister was born in Geneva.
So immigrants.
Yeah, exactly. I arrived in Halifax. My father, as he was telling me, had the choice going to Australia, South Africa, or Canada. That was the idea. He moved to Canada, and when he had a job, my mom followed a year later, and I think there's a question of independence. I saw them struggling. It wasn't easy. They separated at a certain time. So, the aspect of independence was there. So in my view, there was always this idea of, call it financial liberty in there. But at the same time, this aspect of creativity also was there, saying, what kind of business could I have? So I remember having small businesses at school. I won't say what it is because, it is legal.
Lemonade stands?
It is legal. It is legal today. So that's another story. But I've done crazy things, in terms of trying to have businesses and all that. Even started a baseball school, at age 18, which was the first baseball school in Canada. So I've always had this kind of entrepreneurial, but I didn't know what. I just didn't know what.
You're just a born businessman by the sounds of things.
Well, I don't know, but I guess there was this aspect of independence. But it's funny because when I was young, I was working for the city of Laval, a suburb of Montreal. And my idea was, I want to get a permanent job here because for me it was, this aspect again of financial stability there. But I had the same idea of having, a small business on the side. And I still remember one of my good friend, who was my boss, he says, sometimes do you think that you almost accepted a job being a civil servant in the city of Laval?
I don't think you would have lost it, Stephan.
No, exactly. So I've had this question a lot, in saying, is there something, I don't know. Same thing, my father spoke, fluently 5 language and was trying to get me to speak Italian at home. And, I've got this, as I said, very independent mindset. And no, I wasn't going to speak Italian. And
any regrets?
Yeah, of course. Of course you'd like to speak, many languages today, but they decided, so you don't want to speak Italian, at least we're going to send you to English school. So think, 70s, you're a Francophone and you're sent in a, high school of 2,000 students, which is Anglophone during the separatist movement in Quebec. I can tell you, I think my average was probably a fight a day. So you learn to survive a little bit. I think my Italian blood helped me because, there was all this,
You might have wanted to use your Swiss blood and create peace.
Yeah, well, it wasn't the case there. I think it was more a survival. So I think there's also this aspect of, survival in this environment, which was a tough environment at school. People talk about bullying at that time is, either you survive or you get bullied. And I think I learned quite fast, choose your fights.
How did that experience shape you? I mean, you're just a kid. And you're having to suddenly deal with the political realities of your province.
Yeah, well, it was a challenge because, I remember, just teachers taking, really radical positions with students that were Francophone, and we were 9 in all the...
Such as? Like, what did you experience? What do you remember?
Oh, no, just if we would have comments or asking questions just to put... maybe a doubt of, what René Lévesque at that time was saying. Oh my God, you would get a 0 on your essay. So it, I think it shaped me a little bit, around what I would call, the Quebec nation and the aspect of protecting the French nature of businesses. And it's something that is well known in the company. We do communicate in French. We communicate in English, but all our communication, there's always a French communication in there, and we don't need a law to tell us that. And I think that's something that came from the school of being bullied by teachers at that time. It wasn't the student, it was the teachers that were just bullying you just because you were a Francophone. It just doesn't make sense.
I want to go back to your childhood. You just mentioned baseball. Were you good at sports? Was baseball just from the Expos? Why baseball? And then I'm obviously going to ask the obvious question after that, which is you went into being an umpire.
Yes. Well, I wasn't good in sports. I was, as I said, I was good boxing. I was good boxing and fighting.
Sounds more like street fighting to me based on what you say.
But it's still a sport. You get in a gym and then it's still, but I wasn't really good. But my friends, some of my friends were involved in baseball when I was 14 years old. And one was coaching, and they said, "Oh, you should coach a team." And I decided to start coaching. 9, 10 years old, and naturally you're competitive, and you're always arguing with umpires, and you're arguing with the other coach, and there's all kinds of arguments in there. And one day, one of my friend coach said, "Stephan, we're going to stop arguing." He says, "I'm going to take an umpire coach next year, and I'm going to know the rules, and I'm going to beat you." I said, "Oh, I'm going to do the same thing." So that's how I started being an umpire. Is I went to umpire school, and unfortunately, if you wanted to keep your permit or your license, you need to umpire. And I wouldn't say I was the best umpire. I think I was the worst umpire I could get, but I could control a game. So the difference of, managing people and being, a little bit of guy responsible for traffic made me a good umpire in there. And I kind of enjoyed it. So that's how my umpire career started, from, a small game when I was 14 years old to,
You got to some big league games, didn't you?
Yeah, indeed. Well, what happened is by 16, I was doing provincial championship. 18, I was doing national. And at age 20, there was the World Cup that was in Trois-Rivières. And they had selected umpires, and they asked me to go, but they needed an exemption from the International Federation because you needed to be 35 to umpire a major competition, an international competition. And I got the exemption. And as a player, you win, you go to final, an umpire, you've got committee that evaluates you, and you get to the playoffs. And I was chosen as the umpire-in-chief for the final, youngest to do that in the history of sport. And it was a game. So go back, 55, you go back, 30-something years ago, and it was a game between the U.S. and Cuba on Worldwide of Sports, a Saturday afternoon. Fantastic game. And that brought me to professional baseball, because at the end of the game, someone knocked at the door. You're in a locker, you're having a beer with your friends, and someone is taking care of your equipment and all that. Someone knocks at the door, and I can still remember, the logo and the name of the guy, Bud. It was Major League Baseball, Bud something. It was written umpire scout. There's scouts for umpire. I've never heard of that. And the guy starts telling you, a good salesperson, we've been following your career. You're rated, number 1 rookie, umpire, number 5, and this. I didn't even know that it existed. And he started to pitch around, the Expos and the Blue Jays, and they wanted more Canadians. And that's where I decided to attend the training camp for minor league umpires, where I was selected.
Right. And you didn't stick with it, though. Why?
Well, I had this dream again. There's always a dream of being number one. I think that was the idea of saying, I want to be the first Canadian Major League umpire. So I did the camp. They were choosing 35, and we were 235. I'd like to tell you I finished first. I finished 35th. It wasn't an adaptation. I'd never traveled. The maximum I'd traveled was to Maine, so that's, a 6-hour drive from Montreal. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every moment. I was 4 years in the U.S., umpiring in a number of what you would call minor league pro ball, working, off-season camps for Major League Baseball. I did it all. But at the same time, you're reflecting on what you want to do in life. And I think this aspect of liberty was there. So I was saying, okay, I'm probably 4 years from the major, 5-year major if everything goes well. I was 24. I was going to turn 25. You're thinking I'm going to be 29, 30, and for whatever reason, you're stuck in AAA, and you just ruin,
prime of your life.
10 years of your exactly. And it just didn't make sense. And, they were paying us $800 per month plus coupons for Burger King. I've eaten so much Burger King in my life that I can tell you the days they were cleaning the grill. So it was just crazy.
When you think about sports and you think about umpiring, there's a lot of parallels to business, isn't there? Like, what are the things that you learned that you're now applying to your career?
Well, a number of things. It's funny because I must have 40 or 50 umpires in the organization that are working.
Interesting.
That are working.
Recruitment tool.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very recruitment. No, I think there's the aspect of communication. I think the aspect of communication, people don't realize that you may have 40, 50,000 spectators, or if you're doing a minor league, you're in a town where there's 10,000 spectators, and you're all alone with these people, and they're all coming from a different background. Minor league baseball is really tough. You've got 25 players on one side, all black. The other ones are 25 all Latinos. And the only way they can get out of poverty, these guys, is their capacity to pitch, run, throw, and bat a baseball. So I think you develop a certain task of I would call stress management. People say, I don't understand. You're not stressed by that. So I think you don't know what stress is all about, because that's one. Two, the aspect of communication. You're francophone. My English was so at that time, and you need to run the show. You need to run the show there. So I think the aspect of communication, the aspect of leadership is very important. And you can make, there's books, from the Association of Baseball and Leadership. I run my business like, a baseball game.
How so?
Well, number one role of a CEO is talent management, in my view. So
you're like the dugout coach.
Yeah. So number one is every morning I get up and I wonder if I have the best lineup. And everyone knows in the organization it's exactly that. I've terminated, president of division that had made their budget for the last 5 years. But in my view, they had won the last 5 races, but they weren't going to win the next races. So this aspect of performance-driven, this aspect of long-term, long season, 162 games, but short season, every game counts, brings a sense of urgency that is very, very important. The aspect of mix, you always say, I'm recruiting for fit, which is, at the end of the day, BS. Because, if you're looking for fit, you're just looking for people that you want to have a beer with, which is not true. You want one third baseman, you want one shortstop, you want one center field, you want one catcher. If you got 4 catcher, it doesn't work. It's like having a CFO catcher and having other person in your organization, which are more salespeople, which is someone who's batting third, which is there for home runs and all. So it just helps me compartmentalize the company and the talent, and always thinking the right person at the right place.
Yeah, I love it. I think there's a lot to be learned from sports to business and business to sports. I certainly use a lot of sports analogies. So I'm assuming you still get out to some ball games.
Rarely. It's funny, rarely. I still I'm part of the group that's trying to bring back baseball in Montreal. I'm a passive investor in there. I still have a passion for the sport. I don't have a passion at watching games. So it's a little bit different. I'll still go, my yearly visit to Fenway and watch a good Red Sox game.
Is that your favorite place?
I like going there.
Everybody loves
a real
Fenway.
stadium. You go there and it smells shit. This is what a baseball stadium should, the
Pure hot
grass
dogs.
smells, the toilet smells, you walk in there and it feels like a real baseball
None of this
stadium.
modern stuff.
No, exactly. You smell, you smell the pizza, you smell the hot dogs, you smell everything. I like that.
Now, one last question from your early days, then we'll sort of get to when you were in the United States. I'd read that one of your first jobs was store detective at the Bay.
Yes.
Was that the beginning of where we've ended up, or was that just...
No, while I was doing baseball, I was coming back in the winters here. And I would work for the city of Laval in parks and all that. And, at the same time, I had a few hours. I'm a little bit of hyperactive at that time. And, I found a job as a store detective at the Bay, working maybe 15 hours a week. And I worked there maybe 4, 5, 6 months maximum. And between you and I, more running after the girls in cosmetics than really running after a shoplifter. But in reality, that's how I became a security expert. This is really how I became a security expert, because when I stopped baseball and I came back, I got my resume out. And I started getting interviews in the security industry. And, it was a bunch of mom and pop, and there was large retailers that were looking people in loss prevention. And, you're going to all these interviews. You say, interesting. It's an interesting topic. And I remember calling the recruiter, Andy. I says, why these interviews in the security industry? Well, he says, first of all, you've been in the U.S. for so many years. He says, and everyone knows in the U.S. there's guns, they kill people, and it's dangerous. So you must know something about criminology. And it says, look at your resume, and you worked at the Bay as a store detective. And I guess that made me a security expert, and that's how I entered the security industry.
You're from Quebec, you're Canadian, but you've really done a lot of your assessments of the nature of and the culture of American business in terms of, I believe your words were, they're more predatory than the usual culture in Canada. How much did your time in the United States shape your attitude on how to do business in Canada and how to compete and win in Canada?
Well, it's been a game changer. That is shaped, I think I'm probably one of the most American CEO you can find, American-Canadian CEO.
In the way you think.
Yes. And I would say when we're publicly traded, there was a number of journalists that were following us, and they would describe exactly that. It says, we love doing interviews where you're so American in the way you answer. You're so blunt. You're so direct. You're so not politically correct in how you answer. And it's good paper for us.
Must have gotten you in trouble from time to time, though.
Oh, many times, many times. But you're right. I see the world in a very predatorial way. You're either on the menu or you're looking at the menu.
Well, it sounds like sports again, right? The other team's here to beat you.
Exactly. I don't believe in the Olympics where there's a silver medal. No one remembers who finished second at the Super Bowl last year.
As they say, you lost to get that.
Exactly. You need to win the last game. That's what it is. So I've built this culture at GardaWorld around you're either looking at a menu or you're on the menu, and this is not the Olympics here. You either win or you lose. So naturally, it brings this aspect of being predator in the markets that we enter.
All right, so then you come back to Canada and you end up in a job as a director of operations with a security company. And in that job, you had a revelation. What was it?
I've had many revelations, but I discovered an incredible industry, and these industry were all run like police force. All this industry was police people trying to be in business. And at the end of the day, I saw this business as being a simple B2B model, but specialized around security. And having studied a little bit what was happening in Europe, because Europe invented, in reality, the modern security market, I was seeing the potential, and I say, we can do something fantastic. And that's my 5 years in this organization. Was named CEO of the business after 6 months because I just transformed the model and just repackaged the process around the business and got it extremely well focused, where we were able to multiply the top line and bottom line by 5. So I really got excited by the potential of the industry.
I think your line was security people were in business instead of business people in security.
Yeah, I've repeated that. I still repeat that in front of investors. It's exactly today.
You're a businessman.
Yes.
This happens to be in the area of security.
Exactly. Of course, I have access. Sometimes people, the business council, probably 70% of the people there, I'm their shit fixer. It's hate to say that, but I take care of their problem. But sometimes they see me as the real security guy. But in reality, I'm the business person that sees a lot of security. So maybe I have a knowledge of security that is a little bit more open than others. But before anything else, I'm a business person.
So we brought the listener now to the place where you have this moment where you realize that, you can do a better job of this than where you're working. And you come home and you convince yourself, I think, to basically take out a second mortgage for $25,000 to start up GardaWorld. Is there ever a moment where you're thinking, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? What the heck am I thinking?
Yes, and yes. Many, yeah. Well, at the end of the day, what happened is, I never felt I was going to be the pure entrepreneur. So I'm not the guy who woke up and said, I'm going to be the pure entrepreneur. But, after 5 years, I sat with the owner who was, former policeman. And, I said, George, I want to buy 10% of your business. And here's what I think we can do. Get some leverage on the balance sheet and we can go and conquer Canada. And he made a pause, and I still remember exactly where it happened in Montreal, the restaurant, and he started yelling after me, but like yelling after me, saying, that's never going to happen. This is a family-owned business. You're insulting me and all that. This business is going to go to my son, who unfortunately was an idiot working for me. And
tell me how you really feel about things sometimes.
But he said, and he paused at the end, and he started calming down, and I'm shocked, and he says, well, Stephan, don't worry. When you turn 65, I'll give you a good check so you can retire. And you say, okay, I'm 30 years old. I'm going to next 35 say, we're on microphone. I'm going to say what I thought in my head. But walking back, it was, that was the end for me. The question was saying, I like this industry. I think I made a difference in this industry. And I think I can make a major difference in the industry. And it's more the aspect of creativity than the aspect of financial that we're pushing there. And the part that I don't say is I look for an investor, to start the business for me for 6 months. And people say security, janitors in uniform, who wants to invest in there? And no, everyone turned down the door. And so, discussion with my girlfriend, which is still my girlfriend 25 years. I said, what do you think if we stop going to Latini and we go to Giorgio instead, or Olive Garden, if for those who prefer Olive Garden, and we go on Tuesday because there's 2 for 1. We sell the nice sports car, and I buy an old Honda Civic, and I start from scratch.
You did all of that?
Yeah, did exactly that, and almost went bankrupt 4 times. It was terrible. It's a working capital business. The more you grow, the more you're almost bankrupt. You need to pay.
But you persisted.
Yes. Oh no, that's something, maybe the thing I do the most is being extremely persistent. When you're an umpire, you learn to be very persistent in there and understanding the dynamic. But I think not succeeding was not an option. Was it difficult? Yes, it was difficult. But go through tough time. I would be the patrolman answering, at 2 a.m, an alarm somewhere, and I would wake up, and Stephanie would wait by the phone in case I want to answer. After I do my tour, I did everything. I did everything, but it's a working capital business. Working capital meaning that you need to pay your employees after 2 weeks. The clients will pay you, 30, 35, or 40, or even 60 days. So the more you grow, the more you're closer to going bankruptcy. And even when businesses were going extremely well, and I was really growing, tripling sometimes.
What year are we talking about here?
When did I start? 95. So 1995. So we did 600,000 the first year, 1.8, 3.6, 6.8, 15, 40, up to over 4 billion today. But
sorry, just say that again in slow-mo. You started with what number in year one?
600,000.
600,000. Yeah. And today
from
it is?
CAE.
Yes.
First client is still a client today.
And you're now
1.8, 3.6, just over 4 billion.
Just over 4 billion. True Canadian success story.
Yeah, and just starting and taking an analogy from baseball. We're just in third inning here, so we can.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that because I think your business, like others, is going to be going through a lot of disruption. But so I asked you the year because, of course, there was an event, September 11th, that really changed the viewpoint on security writ large. Because as you said, it was just seen as people who man the front door. What did you do in that situation to see what was coming and how business was going to change for you in the industry?
Well, the perception of security has really changed. But at the same time, did it really change the dynamic of the business? No. I wouldn't say that.
Did it professionalize it more?
I'd like to say yes. The answer is no. Unfortunately not. For some companies, you're seeing it more, I would say, in the last few years, where there's the aspect of professionalism is more important. But if I look at the U.S. market, I exited the U.S. market. I had a guarding business in the U.S. and I exited it because it was just a commodity business. You were competing against Burger King to recruit staff. People were not ready to pay. You look what they did with the TSA in the U.S. They took the employees that were doing anywhere between $6 and $7 an hour. They brought them in-house. They gave them an increase of $15 an hour. And today, they've got these guys that are paying them, $23 to $27 an hour, unionized and everything. And we say, well, the service is terrible. This is because it's the same guys that were doing $6, $7 an hour. They haven't changed the dynamic of the industry. So some companies, because of, I would say, a question of proper governance, I've made a difference. But the worst on the planet are the governments. The worst on the planet are the governments, which go to hiring companies that are not regulated, that hire people that are not licensed. They'll do all the tricks just to be able to make their budget. So yes, the aspect of security where it has changed is how the Middle East market opened. How the Middle East market opened, how it opened up in terms of opportunity for an entrepreneur like me was looking at the world and saying, where can I make a difference? That had an impact for us. But the aspect of professionalism, unfortunately, not really. Despite the fact that, I think we were lucky at that time that, I started the business with the idea of having, this aspect of quality in there. Always value. The value proposition was always saying, I'm able to manage this business as a businessman better and give you a better quality. But more importantly, consistency, working with the idea of really consistency instead of saying you're going to get quality people. So it was all about the process and the training.
Now, as I mentioned, GardaWorld is, of course, a great Canadian success story. You could have set up the operations anywhere. You chose Montreal. You've invested in Montreal. You found the talent in Montreal. You've convinced capital to invest in Montreal. What does it take to grow Canadian champions?
That's a good question. I think, the aspect of Montreal, again, being under radar, we're, I think, the third or fourth largest head office in Montreal, and people always think about certain companies, but we've been able to stay very private in there. But before answering your question, I would go to something a little bit different, is the aspect of having no policy of building global champion here in Canada. The number of people, and I still remember Rick Scott, who was governor of Florida, who did everything for me to move our head office to. I'm a proud Canadian. I go everywhere as a proud Canadian. I may be not sharing some of the values of governments that go there, but I've got my Canadian flag there. When I'm in Africa, Middle East, people, they'll hate the Americans, they'll hate the Brits, they hate the French, but they do love the Canadian, and we still have a very strong brand here. But the aspect of policy of building global Canadian champion, I could tell you I'm the largest provider of security to the U.S. government, to the British, to the Australian, to the French, to the EU. And actually you would say Canada. What about the Canadian? And I would say ABC. And what's ABC? Anything but Canadian. And I think that's the most negative. And there's not one year that there's not a discussion around the board and all that and saying how you're doing business with the Canadian government. Why are you still here? And why don't you take some tax benefit somewhere? And I think this aspect of proud Canadian, I love Montreal. The roads are not paved, but the energy is great here in Montreal. The labor is fantastic. We've got a management team here that is great. We're embedded in the community here. We love it. But coming back to the question around how do you build it, it's being open to the world. I think my biggest mistake I made is when I started in Quebec, I went west instead of going south and around the world. Canada's a small country, but using Canada and using the brand of Canada to grow, I think that's the part we forget here sometimes. We've got a fantastic brand here, but we just don't use it.
I had read that you had wanted Garda to be known as the Walmart of security. What does that mean?
Well, I think that's more a journalist that decided to put me at that, and it became, I think an article. I think I can still see the article, the Walmart of security. But I think it was the idea of this one-stop shop in there, where there's an aspect of value in there. So today we've been able to do that in a number of markets, going from the people side to the equipment, to the alarm, to the response, and all that. So I think that was more the idea around being this one-stop shop. There's a 911, you call 911, it's us, and we can take care of almost everything on a value basis, meaning on a quality basis. At Walmart, you'll have the Black & Decker, and you'll get the Black & Decker at the right price instead of getting it somewhere else. With Amazon today, it's different. You get it at a cheaper price, but that's another story.
So how is corporate security evolving in Canada, given what we're seeing, the evolution of even terrorism? And when you think about it, cars running into people, random shootings, malls being shot up in the U.S. and stuff. How is corporate security responding to this?
Terrible. We're the most naive on the planet, I think, on that. And unfortunately, that's going to hit us. There is not one week that I travel that there's not someone who talks to me about the incident that happened at House of Commons, where someone came in, and if it wasn't for someone who shot, the cabinet was all dead. And here, it made page 8 or page 9 of the Journal de Montreal or a newspaper, and because it was important who was in the goals for the Canadians that night. So I think there's really an aspect of naive here. There's an aspect also of having our governments understand the dynamic of security, the dynamic of change with immigration. I think we're good at doing that, but when you think that the average shooting per day in Toronto is 1.2 per day, that's scary. This is over 350 a year. You're starting to look like Chicago here. And you can say it's gangs, it's this, it's that, but this is just a start. And you move in there with the aspect of terrorism, and you open your borders, you're close to the U.S., immigration a little bit more open. I think there's an aspect of thoughts here that unfortunately the behavior is not there. That's for sure.
Now, your business, like every other business I seem to read about, must be experiencing disruption. And disruption can also be a positive influence.
Yes.
I'm assuming that things like artificial intelligence, robotics, the use of data, how are those things impacting your business, and how will they impact the future of how security is being provided? Like, do we still need human beings doing this?
Well, I think the answer is yes. It's funny because when cameras started, all the systems of camera, I remember sitting with investors at that time. I was growing. I've always been looking for money, that's for sure. So I've always been in front of investors, and people were saying, your business won't exist, because for 3 guards, we'll put a camera and a guard. And the problem is the more you put a camera, the more you see things. The more you see things, the more you need people to get involved. That's been the reaction. You look at the growth of the security industry, the people side of the business, since cameras have been there, it's unbelievable. The growth is there. The aspect of combining with technology is important. That's the future. We have a big business in the U.S. of remote monitoring, which is attached to artificial intelligence. So you're able to have one person looking at 7,000 cameras, and just by the analytical, he's able to focus on what's happening in there. So definitely there's a change in there, but it remains a people business. It's like arriving in a hotel and saying you're going to check in online at the hotel and get your room. Yeah, you can do that, but you still want someone that's going to give you your key and give you your bottle of water and all that. There's an aspect of hospitality in there. And the world is, yes, statistically, the world is safer today than it's ever been. But in reality, the perception of security is higher than anywhere. And the aspect of security, when I say security, it's not just criminality. I'm just looking at our business of travel security. Our business of travel security 15 years ago was all around the kidnap and ransom, so you get people kidnapped. And today it's someone being stuck in an earthquake. Puerto Rico is a good example. The number of evacuations we did in Puerto Rico when there was a hurricane. This is the change also in we're talking around the world is you got people that are traveling. Maybe you're traveling on vacation, but even if you're traveling on vacation, the impact on your business is very important for the board. So they don't care today if you're traveling for pleasure or you're traveling for business. You are traveling and you're important to the business. So all the aspect of travel security becomes extremely important. So there's a number of changes that are happening in the world. I look at Africa where, the growth market is just unbelievable there.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the corporate side of your business, but I also know that you're very involved with NGOs. And you look at what's going on around the world in terms of the movements that are taking place, in terms of the uprisings from the challenges in Hong Kong to the Arab Spring and so forth. Again, where does security fit into all of this, and what's happening behind the scenes there that we don't know about?
Oh, I've seen, just to bring me back sometime to reality, I try to visit refugee camps around the world. And I still remember, visiting a refugee camp just at the Syrian border of Jordan, all women and all children. And still remember traveling from Amman and it's 46 degrees outside and you arrive. The Jeep just parked in the middle of the camp and the door opens and the first thing I did is threw up because the smell of death that was there, it was just unbelievable. So unfortunately today we see the world sometimes through video games, through TV, through newspaper, and we don't see the reality of Syria, 5 million people being displaced. That's a change. These 2 years of these 5 million being displaced, there's game changers there, and that's going to transform humanity. And you can go to other countries from, I've gone through refugee camp in Rwanda and Burundi or at the Ugandan border, and what you see there is you can't describe. It's just, but you need to come back and saying, okay, what can I do? But at the end of the day, it's.
But we're going to see more of these situations, likely, not less, particularly some of the uprisings that I've talked about. We're seeing a bit of that in Egypt. Where does security fit into all of this? Are you hired by countries? Are you hired by corporations? Are you hired by the protest movements? Who brings you on board?
We rarely work for governments. We will work for the U.S., British, and all that. We don't work for local governments. That's something it removes the aspect of potential corruption and all that. So we've closed the door on that. But we work a lot for NGOs. People don't realize, the number of people that get kidnapped in those places.
Like, are we talking like the Greenpeaces of the world?
Yeah, the Greenpeaces, the Médecins Sans Frontières, the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, UNICEF, and I can go Oxfam and a number of organizations that work there. And there needs a kind of policing in those camps, access control, evacuations. So we're playing a major role for NGOs around the world. Mostly paid by, U.S., British, the French, and the EU governments in a number of situations, in Africa and the Middle East.
As we wind down, I wanted to ask you just a couple of more topics. One is your view of leadership. We've touched on it, how it was shaped from being an umpire and sports. I've often looked at leaders, and do they excel in times of success or do they actually excel in times of adversity? And so you've had adversity in your life. I mean, your stock in 2008, in the height of the financial crisis, went from $17 to 57 cents.
And I bought 3 million shares. That made me billionaire.
I was going to ask you, what did you do? You bought 3 million shares. That's the answer. Buy low, sell high.
No, but coming back to that, it's so funny. I had I forget the name, the people that bring you a document that they want to seize the house and all that. They were coming so often to the house that my girlfriend knew their name. It was a real joke because the banks were all over us at that time. Not because the operation wasn't going well. The operation was going well. It's just a perception of risk around debt at that time that was crazy. And the stock price when, at a certain time, 27, 28.
But this shaped you as a leader, that moment?
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, definitely. And I've had 3 other, times like
near-death
that,
experiences.
the role of a leader is true alignment. That's what you're looking for, people. You're looking for true alignment, and I think that's something I do extremely well. But at that time, I brought everyone. I said, stop focusing on what's impossible. Focus on what's possible. We're going to emerge out of this crisis, and we're going to be the best company on the planet. So we're going to focus on making sure we got the best margin, we're the best performing, we're going to start putting KPIs in there, and just bring this business to what it is today. We're seen as the best operator on the planet in the fields that we're active. And I think we came out, and we are GardaWorld today, not despite of this, but helped by what we went through.
Now, speaking of help, and I want to end on this topic, and that is the importance of philanthropy in your life and in the life of your partner as well. You've got a foundation in your name. You've gone out of your way to support veterans. Just talk to us about your interest in philanthropy, where that comes from, and at the same time, maybe tell us about the BOLO program.
Yes, well, you did your research there. So I think that's something fantastic from the U.S. is exactly that. People start giving money young. And here I'm always surprised when I'm having dinner with people my age and they're successful. And I say, are you giving, what are you supporting? And people say, I haven't started. I'll start when I'm 65. I said, well, I don't understand. You're worth $300-400 million, and why are you not giving back today? And this is something that I've always been extremely discreet on that. We're given for a long time in Middle East a lot, supporting orphanage, supporting, still remember, supporting an exhibit of art from Afghan girl in Qatar, the Qatar Museum at the Doha Museum. I couldn't go. Stephanie went, my girlfriend, and there was the Taliban there. It was, so we've always done that in there. Veterans in Canada, I think, is another part we just forgotten here. I won't get in the commissioner, this NGO that is sponsored by the government, who does $600 million of revenue protecting, the government with no veterans. I won't go necessarily in there, but the aspect of how we've treated veterans here and how we treat veterans everywhere in the world, is an issue, and how we're able to help in having certain programs for the family, not just for the veteran. We're trying to play a big role in there, but that's more a corporate, all the company, because we've got so many veterans in there. Program BOLO is a funny part. You take the island of Montreal.
Let the listener know what it stands for.
Be on the lookout.
Be on the lookout, BOLO.
So the program BOLO is a funny part. And it comes from a little bit of what I would call the fugitive movement, or the aspect of understanding that, for example, on the island of Montreal today, which is a population of 1.8 million or something like that, there is today 10,000 people that are wanted just on the island of Montreal. That's just the island of Montreal. So you talk about terrorism in Canada, and that's the part we're naive. There is only two policemen working on a fugitive squad out of Toronto, and no one in Canada works on that. Absolutely no one. The people in the U.S., they send warrants here for, the marshals in the U.S., and no one is working in. So you get arrested if you go on a red light and they check and you're in the system and they arrest you. There is not this philosophy here. And I'm in the view that the role of public safety, as Canada is changing, is the role of every single citizen. It's not the role of the police as saying there's something happening at the neighbor, there's something happening. There's an aspect of being exactly that, being on the lookout for what could be the risk for you, what could be the risk for a country. So, of course, we're focusing on what I would call major criminals. And what we've done is we've worked with a lab in Montreal to develop I would call it a kind of technology that is able to amplify events. When you're looking for someone, when they decide to put a focus on someone, we've developed a system that puts a lot of pressure on the person using social media. And we've been very successful. We've done, on the first year, 7 cases. We've caught one person that was wanted for 15 years. The objective is not necessarily to catch more people, but it's to get people to realize on the long term that the world might be safe. But if everyone was doing their job of being on the lookout, the world would be a safer place.
This has been fascinating speaking with you. Thank you for taking us through the journey. I do have some baseball questions to end with because I think people want to know. This should probably be an easy one, but American League or National League?
I'm a National League guy, yeah.
Yeah, the surprise expo side, right?
Yeah, I'm a National. American League is more spectacular. I would say the National League is more strategic.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a subject for another podcast altogether. This will probably answer itself as well, but designated hitter versus no designated hitter.
Well, it's exactly the aspect of designated versus no designated. I'm the person that the pitcher should bat. So that's why the aspect of National League is more important there.
Are we going to see baseball in Montreal?
I don't know. There's people working really hard there. There's a view to that. I'm also involved on the basketball. I have more. I think there's a clear path on basketball here coming to Montreal. I think there's something there. Baseball, there's a path of the team in two cities. Would the baseball player accept that? But clearly, the owner of the Tampa Bay team wants to do something in there. But I'll let Stephan Bronfman, who's running the show on this one, as the spokesperson.
Well, Stephan, this has been a home run of our podcast. So thank you so much for doing this. And we appreciate you sharing your personal story, but also the story of GardaWorld, yet another great Canadian success story.
Thank you, Goldie. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to Stephan Crétier for being my guest on this episode of Speaking of Business. Subscribe now for more conversations with Canada's top innovators, entrepreneurs, and business leaders. Search Speaking of Business wherever you find podcasts or visit speakingofbiz.ca, that's biz with a Z, to join our email list and follow us on social media. Until next time, I'm Goldie Hyder.